I arrived in Centralia on a late October afternoon, when the Pennsylvania sky was as gray as the ash left behind in a hearth long gone cold. My name is Lynn, 29 years old, a freelance reporter for a travel magazine in Philadelphia. The editors wanted a piece on America's ghost towns, and I had chosen Centralia not because it was the most famous, but because it was the only place on the list that was still dying. The other ghost towns had died completely, fossilized into the past. Centralia was different. Centralia was still burning. In 1962, people set fire to garbage in an old dump near the cemetery. The flames caught an exposed seam of coal, then followed the seam down into the earth. 60 years later, it still has not gone out. No one has been able to put it out. The fire just keeps gnawing at the coal beds running beneath the town, spreading a few centimeters wider every year, baking the earth red to more than 1,000 degrees. Smoke and heat seep up through the cracks in the road, rising into the cold air, like the breath of something asleep below. By 1992, the government ordered the entire town condemned. The population fell from over 1,000 to a few dozen, then to a handful. In 2002, the Postal Service revoked Centralia's zip code. On paper, this town no longer exists. But I was standing right in the middle of it. I parked beside a cracked road. On either side were empty, squared-off plots of land the foundations of houses long since torn down, now reduced to front steps leading up into nothing, and concrete walkways leading to doors that were no longer there. Weeds grew up through the cracks. Somewhere in the distance, a thin column of white smoke rose straight into the sky, motionless, as though it had been painted into the air rather than rising from the ground. I took out my camera, snapped a shot. The click of the shutter rang out crisp in the absolute silence, and I startled at the sound of it myself. There were no birds. I noticed it in the very first minute. Not a single bird, no insects, no wind threading through leaves. Only a silence that was dense, heavy, and unnaturally warm against the October cold. The ground beneath my feet was not cold. It was faintly warm, through the soles of my shoes, like the skin of a living creature. I knew about the boy, Todd Domboski. In 1981, the 12-year-old was playing in his backyard when the ground suddenly gave way beneath him, opening into a deep, yawning pit. He fell, caught hold of a tree root, and hung suspended over a well of hot smoke rising straight from the inferno below, carbon monoxide enough to kill a person in minutes. His cousin pulled him up just in time. They say that if he would been a minute slower, he would have vanished forever into the earth of Centralia, his body never found. That pit was what made all of America take notice of Centralia. It was what made the government decide, this town could not be saved. I stood there, looking down at my feet, and for the first time understood clearly that beneath this fragile layer of soil lay an entire labyrinth of fire. Tunnels of coal, glowing red, collapsing, alive. The ground I stood on was only a crust. A crust that could split open at any moment. I walked more carefully after that. It was getting dark. I had meant only to take a few shots and then head to my motel in Ashland a few miles away, but the dying light cast a strange orange hue over the columns of smoke, and I could not bring myself to leave. I walked deeper into the heart of the old town, following the traces of roads that had become little more than footpaths. That was when I saw the old woman. She sat on the concrete front steps of a house that no longer existed, only the steps remained, leading up into open air. An old woman, very old, wrapped in a worn brown wool sweater, her gray hair gathered into a neat bun. She sat gazing toward the largest column of smoke, her hands resting on her knees, so still that at first I thought she was a statue. "Hello," I called, my own voice sounding out of place. She turned her head. Her face was a maze of wrinkles, but her eyes were bright and sharp, jet black. "You should not be here when it gets dark, child," she said. Her voice was hoarse, like old paper rubbing together. "The ground here does not like strangers walking on it at night. I am a reporter. I am writing a piece about Centralia." I stepped closer. "Do you still live here?" She smiled, a smile without any joy in it. "Live. There are still a few of us. They say we have to leave, but leave for where? My home is here. My husband is here. My parents are here. She pointed a gaunt finger toward the distance, where I could vaguely make out the shapes of gravestones. They are all here. Street. Ignatius Cemetery. One of the few things in Centralia still cared for. They say funerals are still held there, that people still bury their loved ones in the burning ground. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions? I sat down beside her on the steps. The ground beneath me was warm. Too warm. Ask away. But let me tell you something first. She looked straight into my eyes. You think this fire was started by people burning garbage? That is the story they tell. That is the story in your books. Yes. In 1962. Fire has burned in Centralia long before 1962, she cut in. The Lenape knew. They never made camp in this valley. They called it the place where the earth breathes. People have dug coal here since the 1850s, and from the very beginning the miners told stories. Knocking sounds in the tunnels when no one was there. Voices calling their names out of the dark. Lamps going out with no wind. The coal seam here is not like other places, child. It is deeper. It is older. And it is hungry. I scribbled quickly into my notebook, one part of me, delighted because this was exactly the kind of material that makes a good article, another part the part buried deep in my bones chilled to the core. The 1962 fire was only a pretext, she went on, her voice dropping lower. It had been waiting. It waited for the whole town to forget that it should be afraid. Then it woke up. I should have gone home. I knew I should have gone home. But people in my line of work have one fatal bad habit: we can't walk away while the story is still open. Madam, I asked, what is your name? Agnes, she answered. Agnes Kowalski. Mrs. Agnes, can you tell me what made you believe all this? Something you saw with your own eyes. She was silent for a long while. The column of smoke before us changed color as the sun set fully from orange to deep red, then to a bruised purple. Darkness fell with frightening speed, and I realized I could no longer make out the road I had come by. In 1969, she said at last. My son, Michael, was 7 then. One afternoon like this one, he went out to play with the neighborhood kids. Near the old mine. The children like to play near the vents where the smoke comes up. They would drop matchsticks down to see if the smoke would set them alight. A foolish children's game. That afternoon Michael did not come home. The other children came back white as sheets, trembling. They said Michael had heard someone calling his name from down inside a hole. A man's voice. They said Michael told them it was his grandfather's voice, my father, who had died 2 years before. He leaned down over the hole, called out, "Grandpa," and then the ground gave way. Michael fell in. The children ran for the grown-ups. We dug for 3 days. Police, firefighters, the whole town. The pit was so deep, so hot, no one could get more than a few meters down. Because of the poison gas. By the 3rd day we had no choice but to fill it back in. We found nothing. No body. She paused. I held my breath. But on the 3rd night, her voice became very small, barely more than a breath. I heard him. Michael. He called, "Mommy," from out in the yard. I ran out. There was no one there. Only a new vent, smoke rising from it. And out of the smoke, my son's voice kept calling, over and over. "Mommy, it is so warm down here. Come down to me. Come down to me." She turned to look at me. Those jet black eyes were now brimming with tears. "He has been calling me for 50 years now, child. Every night. That is why I won't leave. I can't leave my son down there alone with the thing that is keeping him." I did not know what to say. As a reporter, one rational part of me registered this as the testimony of a mother traumatized for half a century, a heartbreaking story of loss and denial. But night had fallen, the ground beneath me was unnaturally hot, and the column of smoke ahead was coiling into shapes I did not want to look at too closely. Mrs. Agnes, let me take you home, I said, rising to my feet. It is dark now, and I also need to. Hush. She raised a hand. Do you hear that? I listened. At first there was only the familiar silence. Then I heard it. A low, muffled sound, very faint, rising up from beneath the earth. Not an explosion, not water. More like breathing. A long, slow, deep breath, from something immensely large lying asleep just below us. And woven into that breathing, so faint I was not sure I had not imagined it, were voices. Many voices. Of every timbre, every age, whispering in a language I did not understand, but whose rhythm sounded like a prayer. Or an invitation. I felt dizzy. Carbon monoxide, my reason screamed. Poison gas. That is why they evacuated this whole town. You are breathing in toxic gas and it is making you hallucinate. Leave. Now. Mrs. Agnes, we have to go. I turned around. The old woman was no longer sitting on the steps. I spun in circles, my heart pounding, using my phone as a flashlight. The faint beam swept across the empty ground. No one. The concrete steps stood bare, coated in a thick layer of fine dust, as though no one had sat there in many years. Mrs. Agnes, my voice cracked. Mrs. Agnes, there was only the echo of my own voice, and beneath it, the slow breathing from the earth, which now sounded as though it were exhaling a soft laugh. She must have gone home. The elderly sometimes get confused, wander off without a word. Her house must be nearby. I would find her, get her home safely, and then leave this God-forsaken place. I went in the direction she had pointed toward the cemetery. My phone's light bounced across the cracked ground. Heat rising from a fissure brought sweat to my forehead even though the October air was bitter cold. With every step I heard the ground creak faintly under my soles, a thin crackle That made me think of thin ice over a lake. You are walking on a hollow turtle shell, said a thought in my head. Below it is 1,000 degrees. I reached the cemetery. In the dim light, the gravestones loomed pale and leaning. Many were very old, carved with the names of Poles, Irish, Ukrainians miners, who had come here a century ago to dig up the coal that killed them. I swept the light across each headstone, not understanding what I was looking for. Then the light stopped on one. Michael Kowalski. 1962–1969. My beloved son, I will come down to you. I stood frozen. The dates matched. The 7-year-old boy. So her story was true, at least the part about the lost child. But the last line, "I will come down to you," sent a chill down the back of my neck. That was not the kind of line a mother carves on her child's grave. It was a promise. A covenant. I swept the light to the headstone beside it. Agnes Kowalski. 1938–2019. I nearly dropped my phone. The old woman I had just been talking to had died 4 years ago. Her headstone stood right here, the earth above it already sunken, the grass grown thick. She had been buried in this burning cemetery, right beside the son whose body was never found. A hot wind blew past, carrying the smell of sulfur and another smell sweet and cloying, the smell of something decaying very slowly in high heat. And in that wind I heard, clearly, unmistakably, a hoarse old woman's voice, rising from right beneath my feet, right beneath the headstone bearing her name. "Thank you for sitting with me a while, child." It has been so long since anyone was willing to listen to me. It is so lonely down here. I ran. I only remember the darkness, the scorching ground beneath my feet, the wild bouncing of my phone's light, and the sound of my heart pounding like a war drum in my ears. I ran toward where I thought the car was, but the roads in Centralia were no longer roads. They were scars, traces, leading to places that no longer existed. I tripped and fell. My hand braced against the ground and instantly recoiled. The earth was hot enough to nearly burn my skin. Heat blasted up into my face from a wide fissure only centimeters from my face. I looked down. In the fissure, far below, there was light. A glowing red, flickering, alive. The inferno that had burned for 60 years. And as I looked into it, I swear I saw shapes moving within that red glow. Human silhouettes. Standing. Looking up. Looking at me. A small hand, a child's hand, reached up from the fissure, pale against the red. Flames, fingers spread wide, reaching for me. I screamed and rolled away, scrambled onto all fours, then got up and ran on. Behind me, I heard a child's voice, clear and joyful, calling after me. Mommy. There is someone new come to play with me. Mommy, hurry, and the old woman's voice, everywhere, in the earth, in the smoke, inside my own skull, yes, my darling. I see her. She is a kind girl. She listened to my story. She will stay with us. I found the car by a miracle, or by permission. To this day I am still not sure which. The car was right where I would parked it, beside the cracked road. I threw myself in, slammed the lock down, and fumbled the key into the ignition. With shaking hands. My hands trembled so badly I had to try 3 times. The engine roared to life. That ordinary mechanical sound was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I glanced in the rearview mirror before hitting the gas. On the road behind me, beneath the red glow of the taillights, there was a crowd. Dozens of people. Men in the worn clothes of miners, caked in coal dust. Women in dresses from decades gone by. Children. They stood motionless in the middle of the road, faces ghostly white, their eyes reflecting my headlights back as red points. They did not come closer. They only stood and watched, quiet, patient, as though they had been waiting for 60 years and were ready to wait 60 more. At the front stood Mrs. Agnes, holding the hand of a boy of about 7. The boy waved at me. A child's friendly little goodbye. Or a see you later. I floored it.